What? Hello? All right. Hello, everybody. I think we're live now. Um, well, first of all, good day, and thank you for being here. My name is François Nicolas Robin, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Alberta in Western Canada. And so once again, thank you for being here today to talk about post-fire restoration. And so first of all, before we go any further into this webinar, the first thing I want to do is thank the Global Landscape Forum for hosting this summit. And I also want to thank Common Land and the Enable Consortium for organizing this event. And so a little bit more details about that, like Common Land and the Enable Consortium aim to develop education on integrated landscape management based on sustainable business models. And doing so help raise a new generation of professionals equipped with the skills and knowledge required to restore landscapes and return social, cultural, and financial values to society while doing so. To be able to continue to serve this growing restoration community, Common Land and the Enable Consortium have developed a learning platform which is called the 4 Returns, and we will provide you with the link, obviously, to this learning platform. And this platform is meant to provide practitioners and professionals with the tools, knowledge, and connections they need to be able to implement holistic and business-driven landscape restoration approaches. Just a few, housekeeping remarks before we start with our speakers today. This event will be recorded. And it will be shared with the attendees, in a few days from now, and plus like a part of the material and some additional resources you guys might be interested in. And so the way it's going to work, the 3 speakers we have today will just share their feedback, their experience, and their work at once, and at the end we will have a Q&A session. So please go ahead and ask your questions while the speakers are presenting their work, and we will address as many questions as possible at the end. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all. So just to give you a little bit of context why we are doing this type of summit and why specifically on post-fire restoration. So on average per year, we count the area burned across the world is close to 450 million hectares. And unfortunately, we are seeing an increase in the number of fire-related disasters. And in the recent past, we've seen, once again, unfortunately, several of those disasters in California, in Greece, in Canada, in Portugal, in the US. So, and that's really, something that now in wildfire science we are trying to work on. And why that? I think, for the 2 main reasons. The first one is climate change. Climate change is going to only make the problem more acute. Why that? Because climate change makes fire season longer, hotter, drier, and so more prone to extreme fire events to happen. And then we also have the other problem that is the expansion of human activities in natural lands. And many of those lands are more or less fire prone. And so we have the perfect recipe for wildfire disasters to happen. So maybe some of you guys have heard about what we call now the new normal. It has been in the media for a few years, I would say almost now. And in wildfire science, we talk more and more about learning to live with fire. So because of those disasters that are happening, and that will just keep happening more and more, we have to learn to live with fire. So what does it mean? It's just you have to, communities have to realize that it's not a matter of if it's going to burn, it's a matter of when it is going to burn. And are we prepared as a community to face a fire or the aftermath of a fire? And so how do we restore in case of a fire? Unfortunately, we are trying more and more in Canada or in the US or in Europe to make our communities more fireproof, but it's it's an ongoing effort, and unfortunately, many of those communities are still very, very exposed to extreme fire events. So, what do we do? What can we do as a society when a community, a landscape, an important watershed, an important ecosystem burns? So what can we do? It goes way beyond just replanting trees. It also or rebuilding houses. It also goes. It also means restoring the community itself. People relationship and the relationship between people themselves, but also between people and their landscape. So there is like in a certain way there is an idea of restoring trust. So this is what we're going to talk today about, like how do we deal with the aftermath of a fire, and what can be done from a physical and from a social aspect. So we will hear like several people from around the world today, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker today from Portugal, Akli Benali, who is a Portuguese researcher on wildfires at the University of Lisbon. Since the dramatic 2017 fire season, where more than 100 people lost their lives, he has been strongly committed in bridging science with societal needs. His current main objective is integrating scientific knowledge in a very applied fashion and developing tools that can help minimize the negative impacts of wildfires in the future. So with that, Akli, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Francois. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to share my presentation. Just please let me know everything is working correct. You can see my presentation, right, Francois?
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Okay, so I'll try to give you a context of what I'm sharing with you guys today. What changed? I mean, Portugal is a fire-prone country for a lot of decades, and what changed in 2017 was basically two things. More than 100 people died in the same fire season. We had more than or around 500,000 hectares burned, which was our top maximum of area burned in 1 year. And we also have the third thing, which also comes up to what Francois was saying. We saw a true increase in the fire season length, and in fact, the most dramatic events, curiously or not, interestingly or not, happened in the beginning. So when we were not expecting wildfires or large wildfires, and in the end of the fire season, where actually most of the people were waiting for rain, and the fact that they were waiting for rain made them set up fires to dispose of residues, and we had horrible 2 days of major wildfires. So we had this was the first year, I would say, that we had a true extension or a lengthening of our fire season. So this is what made 2017 such a special, in a bad way, year. Specifically, the case that I'm showing today is for the Alvares region. Alvares is a civil parish in the center of Portugal. The center of Portugal in this 2017 fire season was heavily struck by wildfires, and in these two specific wildfires that we see in red and orange colors, around 40,000 hectares burned in two wildfires that started more or less in the same at the same hour. In the Alvares parish, which is marked by the darker contour in the map, over 6,000 hectares burned, which for a parish, an area with 10,000 hectares, means that in less than 1 day, 60% of the area was burned, and they had estimated damages of over 20 million euros. So looking at the social and also economic part, in less than 1 day, the work of many people and the lives of many people were changed dramatically. So that's the power of natural hazards and wildfires in specific. Nevertheless, this region, what I'm going to show next is an animation of the sequence of wildfires in the last 40 years, so that you can clearly see that it's not a specific moment in time, 2017. This region specifically has a large historical, has a large history of wildfires. And so the animation that we're going to see right now shows the wildfires in the last 40 years. So the colors will change the map when the areas burn more than once, okay? And so in the last 40 years, although the area of the parish is 10,000 hectares, more than 20,000 hectares burned. So it means that the parish burned twice, in an equivalent of twice the size of its area in the last 40 years. So I think the animation speaks for itself. And of course, now we're going to see 2017, that it's going to change a little bit, the entire scene. So we were called, as a university, we were called by landowners to help them to identify some guidelines, to provide, so to bounce back a little bit better from this catastrophic wildfire. And they wanted us to give them some help, some scientific-based guidelines to help them lead the way for the next, and define a strategy for the next 30, 40 years. So first thing we had to do was understand, why is this a problem? Francois made a good overview of some of the factors that influence wildfires. I would say that these are general factors. We need to, when we're diagnosing such a small area or a specific region, we need to understand the specific factors that influence the fire regime in that area. So in this case specifically, what made this area so vulnerable can be divided in three major factors. First, in the last 100 years, the landscape, the forested area in the landscape increased from 10% to 90%. So there was a large forestation in the last 40 years, leading to a continuous fuel in the landscape, continuous fuel patterns in the landscape, and that were also coincident with a change in life in the rural parts of Portugal. People started to live in a more modern way, gathering less and less material from the wood. So the forested area increased, but also the fuels increased with it, because people were removing fuel with less frequency. So this is one of the factors, an important factor. The second factor is, again, human. And what we see in this part, it's not widespread in Portugal. It's, I would say, at least half of Portugal has more or less the same problem, is that we have very small and fragmented forest properties. You can see that the average parcel size is 0.6 hectares. So, and this is widespread over 3,000 owners in a 10,000 hectares area. So very, very scattered and small properties dispersed in many landowners. Most of them don't know they have their lands there. Most of them don't care if they know. And there's only a small, very, very small fraction of landowners that do care, that do know where their lands are, and they want to make something out of it. The rest, of course, is abandoned, and fuel just keeps on growing, because that's what vegetation does until it gets burned again, right? So the third factor is, again, human. And you would notice that I'm not speaking about climate, not necessarily because climate didn't change, but clearly because humans changed in the last 40 to 50 years at least, in this area. So what happened? Since the 60s, there was a large abandonment population here, and they lost about 75% of their inhabitants in 50 years. What happened to those that stayed? They got older, and getting older, they get less active and they are less involved in activities in the forest. So again, the result is basically fuel piling up. That's making our landscapes, or this landscape specifically, a place that is quite prone to large wildfires. So what could we do to reduce the vulnerability of wildfires, or vulnerability of this specific region to wildfires? We need, in our opinion, we need to work in three different dimensions. They can be combined, I would say. First, we need to reduce the large wildfire frequency. The second, we need to increase the forest-related income, because if we stimulate economy, the forest economy, we will stimulate forest management, we will stimulate decreasing the fuel loads in the landscape, and we will increase the probability of having people also in the forest and managing our forest. The third thing is we can do both of these two things that I mentioned, but we need always to keep our people and assets safe. Okay, because if risk still is very large and people are afraid of losing their lives just of being of living or working in the rural areas, people will probably make the decision of not going there. So we need to work on these three aspects so we can have a reduced vulnerability of of this specific region to wildfires. So that's what we did. We made some proposals, some specific proposals. I'm going to be very, very brief on this. So I would say we can divide the proposals in three large areas. First is related with spatial forest planning. So we developed a spatial forest plan very much adapted to the current landscape. We didn't feel that we should change the current landscape so much that people would say that it was an utopic scenario. So we tried to keep it close to what it is, but change it in a way that fuel loads and the protection of people could be incorporated in this spatial forest planning. How? So we suggested to open the landscape and create areas of at least 30% of open spaces, so reduce the forest area, and create areas where there's some discontinuity in the fuel, so that when fire comes, because as Francois said, it's not a matter of if fire is going to come, fire will come. The question is, what kind of environment is he going to find? And if he finds a discontinuous, fragmented in terms of fuel, landscape in terms of fuel, it's going to be easier to fight a fire, and it's going to be they are going to have the tendency to be smaller. So that's the first thing, open the landscape. The second thing is to maintain forest production. This is an area with a lot of forest production, both of pine trees and eucalypts, which are, of course, controversial, but we need to maintain this forest production. So because forest production is maintained through management. And management, one of the things that management does is remove fuel from the landscapes, okay? The third thing, of course, is even maintaining forest production, not all of the area is going to be prone for forest production, and so we should diversify a little bit more forest composition, which is in fact not it's not the actual scenery. Nowadays we have 90% of the forest composed by 2 species. So we need to diversify a little bit more, and of course apply suitable silviculture models to these different species. On the second, let's say, axis is to promote an intensification of forest management. So basically, we need to reach the landowners and promote and stimulate the increase of forest area that is frequently managed. In this way, we can reduce fire risk and we can increase forest productivity and income. So basically, hitting 2 of our main objectives, which is reducing the fire frequency, the large wildfire frequency, and increasing forest income. And of course, we need also to improve safety of people and assets. And for that, we identified some priority villages based on risk that was, of course, calculated using some very advanced scientific tools. And we identified also villages that did not have shelters and needed shelters. And we also identified escape routes. In terms of management, one thing that I must say, we made some, let's say, scenarios slash proposals of increasing very moderate areas that were not managed. So increasing areas, managed areas in very let's say very small contributions, but still you will see that the small contributions make a large difference. So we made two proposals of increasing 20% of the area, so it's around 750 hectares. It's 20% of the area that is not managed, that is only managed by private landowners and not industrial landowners, and the other proposal is to increase 35% of that area. And what we did was, after we did that, we tried to understand, integrating our scientific-based tools, and mostly these tools are simulation models. What we did was we tried to understand, to quantify what would be the benefits of these things that we were proposing. And the benefits in the next 40 years, in terms of wildfires, would be a 20 to 40% of reduction in the burnt area, and 30% less frequency, a lower frequency of large wildfires. Still, this can be seen as a moderate benefit, but this is the difference between, in the next 40 years, having a big, large wildfire like 2017, or not having that wildfire in the 40-year horizon. In terms of people safety, we understood, we quantified and estimated that our proposals would have a decrease, would have an impact on a decrease of 15 to 30% of villages, of less villages belonging to the high and very high risk category. And this decrease was not larger because risk is a combination of probability of a large wildfire occurring, but also of the susceptibility of the people there. So we're still going to have old and aged population, which will still be very fragile and prone to damages, of course. And then in terms of economy, these proposals that we did would have a benefit of increasing the forest income in between 80 to 110% only for the non-industrial private landowners. So there's a benefit in investing some money. Investing some money reduces the burnt area, increases the safety of the people, and also brings back money to the non-industrial private landowners. So it's a win-win situation. And of course, overall, the economic, social, and environmental benefits, if we also integrated the externalities of the negative externalities of large wildfires, like the rehabilitation of burnt areas and all the costs that are associated with that, these benefits could go up to 3 million euros in 40 years. So this is about it. Basically, this is, of course, a very economic perspective, but it's also a social perspective, and also a little bit of a biophysical perspective, because we think that without integrating all of those, we're not going to have a safer landscape. We're not going to have a landscape that has less wildfires, and we don't believe that's the way. We believe the way is sustainability is attained by stimulating economy, protecting people, but also reducing the frequency that large wildfires occur in the landscape. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Akli. I think that's a very cool perspective, because it shows, as I said in the introduction, it's not only like restoration is not necessarily, oh yeah, we're going to go and rebuild houses and replant trees. We're just like, when we can actually, you show very well that we can apply Restoration can be mixed with, and probably must be mixed with, risk management, and I think that's a very cool perspective you're giving us here. We have a couple of questions, but as I said, we will deal with that at the end of the the presentation. So thank you very much, Aki, for that, and I will introduce our second speaker today. So our second speaker is Misha Tisdale from South Africa. So Misha is an environmental and social change activist. He's the current director of the Green Pop Foundation, founded in 2010, and in 2011 he landed top 200 young South African by the Mail and Guardian, and in 2014 was nominated by Mail and Guardian and Department of Environmental Affairs as one of South Africa's top climate change leader. Well, congratulations, Misha. That's pretty cool. So with that, Misha, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Such a privilege to be here. I'm calling in from Livingstone, Zambia. Yeah, great to be able to connect with you. Maybe just to set the context, I'm not a scientist, nor am I a researcher. I'm really kind of a social entrepreneur. My mission is to get people active and not anxious about the state of the planet. And we do this through passion and horsepower and collaboration. And obviously we do try as much as possible to connect with people in the know. But for the most part, it's really about collaborating with a lot of people. Why I'm particularly excited about this conversation, I believe that there's really a beautiful meeting point in terms of restoring ecological function as well as restoring our own humanity. And in particular, when it comes to fire and the paradigm that fire brings, I think fire essentially draws a line in the sand, which allows for us to start changing the context in quite a particular way. So I'm just changing my screen here. No? Thank you. So the fire I'm talking about happened in the Southern Cape. The Southern Cape is a part of the Western Cape in South Africa. It's characterized by a mosaic of indigenous forests and pockets of fynbos, which needs to burn. There was also a huge amount of plantations and a high presence of alien vegetation that's kind of run away. It happened between 2017 and 2018, and it was the largest recorded fire in South African history, with over about 3 billion rands worth of damages. On a landscape basis, the fire was mostly caused due to plantations and runaway invasive non-indigenous vegetation, unsustainable farming practices. There's a lot of urbanization that happens in fire belts, which is obviously not ideal. And then fynbos, our natural vegetation here, has a fire cycle which it needs to go through. And because of various forest policies, those fires have been reduced. And so the fuel load in the landscape is quite high. South Africa, we experience a summer fire season. However, at particular times of the year, we get something called a berg wind, which is largely during the winter period. And it's a very hot and dry berg wind. We had an extended drought period. And in a particular time of the year, we had over 30 degrees temperature, over 30 knots of wind, and then under 30% humidity. And that essentially made the landscape pretty much like a tinderbox. I'm just going to change the... in addition to this, the preparation from a local government and community perspective, they've never had a fire of this magnitude. So there were insufficient protocols, services, communication lines, resources to respond effectively just weren't in place. And then when things did get responded to, there was a very much a knee-jerk reaction in terms of providing funds and resources. What was amazing to see is that South Africans came together in quite a significant way to really bring light and resources and funding to help mitigate the worst of the damages that happened. However, the challenge was that a lot of that potentially was squandered. A lot of NGOs sprung up overnight just to start trying to clean up the mess, and not that much protocol was in place yet to make sure that those resources were expended in a proper way. I think another big issue is that you've got these massive decisions that need to be made in a very short time period. And so there's this sense of extreme pressure to disperse the resources, to get the right people in the right places in terms of mitigating the worst of the challenges that are happening. And I think a lot of the time, those resources, the finances goes into grey infrastructure, when if it went into green infrastructure, you'd probably find there would be a lot more benefit that came out of it. So to go segue into how Green Pop responded, for the last 8 years, we've been hosting an event called the Festival of Action, where over a 3-week period, we bring people together to plant thousands of indigenous trees, to learn about natural building practices, to brighten up schools, to do environmental education wall murals, to clean up alien vegetation areas, to do various kind of practical sustainability when it comes to conservation and climate change, and getting people together to celebrate on things that are important. And so when the fire happened, we were called by a lot of people in the garden route. I think we had over 100 people connect with us saying, would you guys like to come and proactively work with us in seeing how do we make something happen in this area. And the types of people that come and get involved are experts, volunteers, educators, because they're interested in the types of workshops, they're interested in being active citizens. And then on the ground, we're working with local school children, local community centers, and local NGOs. For us, it's not necessarily about going and kind of being the saviors in a community. It's more about going and highlighting the amazing work that's already doing and amplifying the things that need to happen in order to allow for people to get to their goals. Let me just change the slide. Our main interventions with regards to management of fire and restoration are kind of focused in 2 key areas. The one is that we're all about activating people. So from a removal of alien vegetation perspective, one of the challenges in South Africa is a lot of the non-indigenous vegetation that we have, it germinates due to fire. So if a fire goes through an area, it poses to be both a threat and an opportunity. It's a threat because more alien vegetation is able to grow in a very short time period. However, it's also an opportunity because the cost of removing fully grown pine and eucalyptus that's not supposed to be in an area is massive. So if you go and you implement clearing of just the baby seedlings, you're able to actually remove a huge amount with relatively little manpower. So what we would do is we'd essentially put out a press release. We would get lots of local NGOs and government institutions, kind of wildlife institutions, etc. And we'd bring all these people together and we'd create a celebration day, which would allow for people to go and clear a huge amount of alien vegetation that had started popping up, anything that's kind of waist height. And because we have so much manpower in such a short period of time, and people have the energy of volunteers, we'd managed to clear quite a significant area. We'd focus on areas that were particular fire risks in the future, areas where the alien vegetation was just the right height, and we'd work with local wildlife authorities to make sure that it was relevant in the context of the work that they needed to do. Second to that, we also do reforestation. So in the context of reforestation, we, again, working with local community centers, local wildlife authorities like Cape Nature and sand parks. Again, we would put out a press release, we would garner support from local NGOs, and we would create a celebration day. And over a 3-week period, we might do this 6 times and plant up to 1,000 trees at a time. What's exciting about this is that the succession process of a restoration journey is that a lot of the time you'd have alien vegetation or a slow process of indigenous stuff coming back up. So we would plot out a site looking at first managing the landscape by creating burns or furrows that would capture the water, removing any small aliens that have already popped up. And then we would look at the local forest system and see what kinds of species were happening in that area and how well were they doing and which were the pioneer species and how could we kind of mimic those forest systems so that it looked fairly similar where we were doing the planting. And then we get a large group of people together and over a period of a day or 3 days, we would look at planting out these species and largely with pioneers, but some succession species. And again, trying to mimic the local environment and bringing in large quantities of mulch so that we can build the organic profile within the soil, cool down the soil over the summer months, and allow for that organic material to break down and essentially feed the trees and shelter them from evaporation, etc. Part of the magic of this is that there's drumming, there's food getting handed out, there's local media coming through. And so the local community who have experienced a tremendous amount of loss, who in some cases are feeling incredibly despondent and potentially helpless, are getting this excitement and this energy and I suppose a sense of support, which allows for them to feel like they're really being able to move the needle around restoring their landscapes. So it's a very exciting experience overall. Some of the key things that we felt came out of these types of experiences. I wanted to just mimic, echo what was said a few times. It's really not a case of if, but when. And this is something that we're seeing over and over again. I think we need to change our relationship with fire and seeing it as a productive catalyst to bring people together. I think there's an opportunity to collaborate on protocols, on plans, on lines of communication. The reality is everyone gets affected by fire and everyone can be a protagonist in the journey beyond fire. So restoring those landscapes, being part of understanding how they can be a role player and not isolating it to just universities or just ecologists or just government institutions, but everyone that lives within a forest landscape can be a role player and can really allow for the needle to change in a positive way. A thing that we've particularly noticed is that the urban wild barrier needs to be respected. There's too many urbanizations, too many houses and developments happening in places where there's a fire belt. And I think that needs to really be clearly looked at. And then I think we need to see restoration as an opportunity for a celebration, to bring local community together, to create hope, to start to change the landscape language surrounding fire and how people are affected by it. I think there's a massive opportunity there. Once that alien or non-indigenous vegetation has been cleared, particularly in our case in South Africa, where non-indigenous vegetation has been a large part of our journey when it comes to fire, you then have a clean slate which you can work from and start to restore the landscape and change the relationship with how we engage with both the people on the land and how they work with the land, as well as the ecosystem function itself. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to your questions later. I'm going to hand over back to Francois.
Well, thank you very much, Misha. That was a great presentation. by the way, we're talking about the event that usually go with this kind of gathering with your volunteers and your people. And if you're willing to share the video you sent to me earlier, just be our guest. You know, it's the moment or never. You know, it's because I watched it yesterday and I really enjoyed it. I think that was very cool. I actually downloaded the song that came on with it. You know, it was very good.
Cool.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that, Misha, and we'll have a few more questions later for you, I'm sure. So it's time to introduce our third speaker, and the format for our third speaker is going to be a little bit different. I'm sorry, we're just like trying to get to fix a quick technical issue. But so our third speaker, her name is Vendria Borari, and she's the first indigenous female lawyer from the Borari community of Pará in Brazil. And Vendria is a committed defender of the Amazon and the rights of its traditional inhabitants. The problem is that our people face daily exclusion, and daily consequences of the degradation of the rainforest in the Amazon. So, because of illegal mining, logging, cattle farming, and the expansion of soybean production in indigenous territories. Indigenous leaders receive death threats on a regular basis and are unfortunately being killed as well for their fight for their rights. So although there's a long history of colonialism that has eroded their culture, Vendria is eager to revive it. As she puts it, people without culture are not people. Vendria is also a skilled ceramist teaching the art of indigenous pottery making. And before we go any further with her testimony and her feedback on the topic today, I'm just going to give a quick, very short introduction and presentation on the fire context in Brazil. Just then we will have discussion, and we will talk about the questions. Yeah, just very briefly, a very short introduction on the fires in Brazil, so we have a better idea. We have a context to what Vendria is going to talk about. So let's go with that. All right. All right, so hopefully you see my... Oh, no, you don't see my screen. Do you see my screen here? All right. Might not... Oh, God. Sorry, I have just a quick little issue. Oh. That's my... All right. That should be okay here. You guys see my screen? See my screen okay? Just checking. All right. So just a very brief introduction to fires in the Amazon. So like the two previous presentations were on two different parts of the world, but that burn under a Mediterranean climate. So they are kind of similar in the way fire happened, very dry fire season one. So yeah, there are like a lot of similarities. But what happens in South America and in the Amazon is very different. So I'm going to try to, it's not my specialty, but I'm going to try to give you guys a brief introduction on that. So you guys are obviously all aware of what happened last summer in Brazil and in the bordering countries. How much there was a huge global outcry about burning of the forest, especially rainforest, and a lot of natural ecosystems. And so you probably all saw those images, satellite images from NASA, where you can see the different hotspots. and like all those red dots. And yeah, like based on the numbers by the Brazilian Space Research Agency, like there was more than 100,000 fires that have been detected since the beginning of this year. And we had a lot of we heard a lot of different numbers when it comes to the area burned this year in South America, and in my opinion, there is no actual real like scientific assessment, a number that has been backed up by science, but the one that I'm showing here on the screen. So like we heard numbers of up to 1 million hectares burned in Amazon forests. But like the monitoring of the Andean Amazon project said that pretty much 120,000 hectares were actually verified, like they were related to deforestation, and then they were burned after deforested areas was dry enough. And so that's a very, very important aspect. There are two actually very important aspects on this slide. The first one is that we heard a lot about, the rainforest is burning. So part of it is true, part of it is actually not. Like you see that South America, it's not only like the rainforest, and the Amazon basin also have like some drier forests, like open savannas that are, meant to burn to a certain degree, which is not the case of the rainforest. So does one burn a rainforest? Well, as you can see here, it's because of deforestation for cattle farming, for mining, for also like for expansion of urban areas to an extent as well. But as you can see here, one of my colleagues, like Mark Cochrane, really put it well in this citation. Basically, what he says is that the rainforest is a closed sort of hydrologic system. The water circulated through the rainforest in a certain way, and if you start to cut the trees down, you actually create openings and you create leaks. And Mark Cochrane used this term when during a presentation. He says that then the forest starts to bleed moisture, and so it just like gets drier and drier, and so it gets much more fire prone, and naturally the rainforest is obviously not fire prone. So it's a fully man-made event. It's absolutely not a natural disaster. It's a fully man-made disaster. But it is something that is very important to understand, is that even if fire is not natural in the rainforest, it doesn't mean that it is not part of those ecosystems, and especially because we have traces of the use of fire in the Amazon rainforest for pretty much 6,000 years. But the natives, the indigenous, when they arrived over there, started to open a few small areas in the forest and to burn them, so the nutrients can actually go to the ground, and the soil would be more fertile. And so there is this very long tradition of the use of fire by indigenous in Brazil, but also in other countries. And so this is very important, that to not mix those fires that can happen and that are controlled and that are necessary for the indigenous lifestyle. And it is very important that's what our next speaker is going to talk about, Enria, that indigenous down there are very, very involved in the protection of their ecosystem, but also trying to communicate about the fact that their use of fire is sustainable. They are not destroying their environment. They are not like burning everything. They are not. It's really to sustain their way of living, which also implies that they are sustaining their culture. And so they are really trying in some places, well, first of all, to really, tell the world and tell people that that's a right of theirs, and that is necessary, that they can keep, keep doing it. So like, it's very important, like in terms of post-fire restoration, that we rely on indigenous fire knowledge, and in some cases that we use that, it's the case here in Canada as well. We are trying to get this knowledge, this fire knowledge from indigenous to reintroduce fire in the landscape, so the landscape is more fireproof. So that was a once again, very brief introduction on the topic. And on that, I will pass it over to Vendria here. So Vendria, you're on screen. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And so yeah, like the stage is yours, and if you can build on what I just presented. I'm sorry if I forgot things. That was just like very, very brief, and I hope it's enough for you to keep building on what I just said, and probably keep building on what our previous speaker said. And once, and I'm going to start as well to introduce some of the questions that have been asked by the audience as well. So yeah, with that, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes, Francois. And I would like to share my culture, my experience in the Amazon, and to understand how is the fire is make part of our culture. We have to understand the situation in this right moment in the Amazon. Yeah. On August 10, 2019, becoming known as the Fire Day. Yeah, on this day, several farmers in the north of Brazil, in a joint movement, they had started fires to areas of the Amazon. One of the fires declared, we needed to show our president, Jair Bolsonaro, that we want to work, and the only way is taking an initiative. And we to clear and form our parts with fire. They think to work, they need to destroy the forest, cut down the forest, and put fire on. They think it's the development of our forest. So this is the main case of fire in our region. The expansion of areas for keeping livestock and for growing agricultural crops. So that they drew the world attention to our Amazon and how it's been destroyed through cattle grazing, deforestation, and fires. On August 10, one single area alone reported as many as 124 incidents of active fires outbreak, which is 300% increased from the previous years. And to justify his disregard for fire, the president Jair Bolsonaro said that the fire was caused by we indigenous people. You may know that for thousands of years, we indigenous people have been controlled small fire to clear a small plantation in the forest. Whenever we going to plant our crops, we first isolate an area with a small root from all the sides. Yes, basically the area used for plantation by us are nowhere near of the areas that are exploited by cattle and soybean farm or illegal lodgers. It's how we simply do not know how to use the fire and work with the forest in a sustainable way. So the management that we have with the forest using the fire it's make part of our life from our cultures. And this management of the forest, the incident of the fires in the forest is very, very small. Then the scale deforestation that the firemen and the larger do make in the Amazon. And this technique that we use it to cut and burn the forest, the fire is fundamental for our lives in the forest. But we know which time we can put fire in the forest in a small scale. Most of the time, we put fire in the end of the afternoon when there is no wind, and we control the fire when it's burning this area that we use for our plantation, for our subsistence. And so also to control the fire in my region, in my place, that is Alter do Chão in Amazonia that I come from. It was created a group of volunteers that's called Brigada Alter. Brigada Alter, yes, was only volunteer that was founded in the year 2017 as a community organization after the fire consumed a person's house. It started simple, a response to difficulty of our firefighter to attend to all the occurrence. And today, because of the practical knowledge and determination, the volunteers, firefighters, are the strong partner of the Federal Fire Department. So Brigada Alter, it's the group that I make part. I'm the first indigenous in the Amazon, forest firefight. So Brigada Alter, the goal of this group is to form 11 volunteer hotspots in order to make enough people available for the summer season, which has every year highest frequency of the forest fire. They also created an emergency fund to have a combat extraction. And also the idea this group is to create a training facility where the new volunteers can learn how to deal with the fire outbreaks. And in Alter do Chão, my place, the fire happened on September 14 this year. It was around 3:00 p.m. when a firefighter made the detection of the fire. And the fire was very, very intense, burning up in a hill. And as the firefighter do not normally fight the fire at night, because very dangerous, because we have snake, animal, poison snake, and for security, they fight the fire in the day. And also at 5 p.m. next day that they detection the fire. At 5 p.m., the brigade's member, the volunteer, along with the Federal Fire Brigade and the military, come into action. Also, after our region, we had support from the local government in other region of the Amazon. They not have support from the Brazilian government, federal fire farms, unite present. And it was in Amazon, and in my place was 5 days with intense firefights that have consumed acres and acres of our forest, and was fought by both volunteer and the federal fire fights and the militaries. And it was this year our reality of our Amazon that was burning. Yeah, we from Brazilian government did have no a plan to fight the fires. Yeah, and now they try to train indigenous community and the traditional population to fight the fire in their territory. It's the goal that they want to do. And we know that most of the fire comes from the big plantation, from the larger. It's not from us indigenous that for 1,000 years the fires make part of our life to survive in the forest, for our plantation, for our night to keep it warm. Yeah, and it's how we live in the Amazon and how the fire make part of our life in the forest. Thank you very much. I hope you can understand my English. Yeah.
No, that's so fun, Andrea. Don't worry at all. Thank you very much for the testimony, and we can really feel the all the the tension. It's really something that really reminds me of things I've seen here with indigenous communities about fire and water, and you just like the preservation of those ecosystems, and I think it's very we're really happy we're here, and and that we heard your vision of the problem, and it's something that when this whole outcry started. I mean, for a good reason, started about those fires in the Amazon and in South America. That was really great that I think that was good to have the voice from indigenous, but I really think we didn't hear enough about that in the mainstream media. But no, that's pretty great that some people are really trying across the world, in Canada, in South America, in Australia, to really preserve the indigenous knowledge. And so, talking about the indigenous knowledge, I wanted to ask. I'm gonna obviously follow up with the questions that have been asked, but I have a burning one. I would say pun intended. I have this question about traditional knowledge and traditional burning. Is it something that also exists in South Africa and in Portugal? I know in Portugal, Portugal was a part of the European Fire Paradox project, so we can use the fire in a good way to avoid larger wildfires. So there might be some traditional knowledge also of the fire use, not necessarily indigenous, but traditional at least. Do you guys, Misha and Akli, aware of this type of knowledge?
Akli, would you like to start?
No, go ahead, Misha. Go ahead.
Okay. So in particular, from a farming perspective, I wouldn't say that there was tradition in the areas that we're working with. South Africa is an incredibly big place, so I can't speak for the whole of South Africa, but definitely in the Western Cape, it's not something I've experienced. However, a large part of the biomes that we are living within, which is fynbos, it needs to burn, and it goes through a natural fire cycle. And one thing I mentioned in the window I had was that, unfortunately, due to some of the legal structures around local forestry, is that those fires have been inhibited. So essentially the fuel load just kind of gets out of control. Every 10 to 20 years, these landscapes are supposed to burn, and this doesn't happen anymore, which is very much problematic.
Regarding Portugal, I would separate the answer in two parts. First, one side of it is we do have a lot of traditional burning, and I would say that traditional burning is separated in has two different objectives. One of them is pasture to stimulate pasture regrowth. So we have, I would say, the northwest of Portugal has that kind of tradition. It's usually made in late winter, beginning of spring, and sometimes also, I think, in the end of the summer. It's a good tradition, but that sometimes get out of control. So we need to take this into account. The other use of fire, a traditional use of fire that has been on the spot for the bad reasons in the last years, is the widespread use of fire to burn residues. And the problem is it's made by usually old people. Things get out of control easily. People die, unfortunately, because they don't. I mean, they don't have. They don't move as fast as they did when they were 40 or 50 years old. So it gets them by surprise, and unfortunately, it's also the cause of a lot of wildfires. And I think the last numbers I saw were like 30 or 40% of the wildfires in Portugal were caused by by residues burning. It could be agriculture or forest residues. It doesn't matter. The objective is more or less the same.
Yeah.
So there are some campaigns targeted on those kind of ignition sources, and they're trying to reduce that. But it's not easy. It's cultural. Having said this, the flip side of the coin is we do need more fire in the landscape. I have no doubt about that. We do need it.
I hear you, and like what you're talking about is like a very specific social context and cultural context that I've met myself in Spain and southern France. It's like older people think the landscape is dirty, so they are going there and they are just like lighting up the landscape on fire, but without any sort of control. So it's an actual problem. So well, thank you guys for those different perspectives, and I'm going to follow up with what the questions the audience asked. So the first one is for all of you guys, and because I think you will have different answers to this question, how do you determine when fires are naturally occurring and when does it become unsustainable / problematic?
Wanna start, Misha?
Sorry, can you repeat yourself? I've got quite an echo on my side.
How do you determine when fires are naturally occurring and when does it become unsustainable, problematic?
So in our experience, it's becoming problematic when it's just way too much of a fuel load happening on the landscape. And this is kind of a two-tier effect in South Africa. We've got a huge amount of non-indigenous vegetation, which is maybe in some cases undermanaged, especially in places where there's a plantation, and adjacent to these plantations there's kind of runaway non-indigenous. And then on the other side we've got indigenous flora, and that's supposed to burn. And so both of these landscapes are not getting managed. And then I think the net result of the fact that these are not getting managed and they're part of fire belt ultimately lands up creating some significant issues down the line. And then if you don't have the right people in place and you don't have the right protocols to be able to manage as things happen, you get these kind of net results of all these different aspects coming together, and then lands up being a disaster situation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Vendria, do you get the question? Do you want do you want to answer something about that? Oh, no, I can't hear you, Vendria. Yeah, that's good. Go ahead.
In the Amazon, we don't have the natural fire on the forest, yeah? It's most of the fire that happen in the Amazon is from the cat farmer, soybean plantation, and the people that do not know to manage the fire, and it go through the forest. So the traditional population, yeah, most of the traditional population knows how to manage the fire in the forest. And that's the reason that we, in the communities, we don't have the destruction, yeah, the fire in the forest, close our communities. Most of the fire when the Amazon in the summer are burning is coming from the farms. And the people that cut the forest and put fire in the forest for plantation in big scale. I answered, yeah.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. No, that's good. That's good. Aki, you want to add something?
Well, I have to be coherent with my presentation. I think we need to look at. I do have to be coherent. So I think we need to look at. We can look at again to the three sides of the three axes that I spoke about in the presentation: the biophysical, the economical, and the social. So I think the answer is somewhat simple, but not that simple. So first, it's socially unsustainable when it impacts people's lives, when it creates fatalities, when it creates danger to the lives of people. Okay, and we have that every year. We had in 2017 a really bad year, but we have that every year. People going to the hospital, firefighters, civilians, etc., etc. So it's unsustainable when it puts our life at risk. Okay, in terms of economics, I think it's unsustainable when it damages significantly the properties, the assets, whatever. And in terms of biophysical dimension, anytime a fire is too intense because of the fuel load, because of the climate conditions, it's too intense, it's going to produce high severity wildfires. Severity in terms of ecological regrowth and that kind of stuff can have severe damages to the ecosystem. So when fire severity, which is something that is more or less easy to determine by satellite or by fieldwork, when fire severity is very high, then fire is unsustainable, I think, in a biophysical point of view. So these three axes need to be have to be taken into consideration when doing that kind of balance between what is naturally good and sustainable and what is not sustainable.
Okay, well, thank you for that, guys. I think that's very interesting. Just to add a little bit to those answers and to maybe as a general comment for the audience, there is no there is no answer. Like there is no one answer to this question. You know, like in some place of the world, some parts of the world, fires occur naturally. They are naturally ignited. In some other parts of the world, we have what we call historic landscapes that have been managed with fire for thousands of years. And in the Mediterranean landscape is a very good example of that. And so we have what we call, once again, historical landscapes. And that's what we are trying to do now, you know, especially when we have events like what happened in Brazil or last summer. It's like for a lot of people who are not aware of that, it's like, oh, like fire is bad, it's necessarily bad all the time. But a lot of people don't realize that many ecosystems depend on fire, and many of those ecosystems that depend on fire are actually ecosystems that are not natural per se. Those ecosystems have been managed by humans for a long time. So that's just something that is very important to keep in mind, that there are good fires and bad fires, and there is not only one solution, and one definition of what is natural, sustainable, or problematic. So, Misha, you're not on screen anymore. Okay, let me. Oh, that's interesting. Let me. Misha, are you around?
Hi.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. You're still here. Yeah. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add one more thing that I've experienced is that, so say you've got like a government body that's essentially disseminating information around best practice around managing ecosystems and how to prevent the kind of catastrophic effects of big fires. So whether it's understanding controlled burns, reducing dead wood, creating bigger spaces between where there's non-indigenous forests or fynbos and houses. Part of the challenge is that a lot of the time local community don't always trust in government and policies that are coming out. And sometimes what happens is people, I suppose there's a bit of a trade-off system. So putting out information that says you need to have preventative measures in place. And those preventive measures then are assumed, well, let's just cut everything down. And this is something that we've experienced as well. So in some places, people would literally just clear cut all the fynbos away and it would just plant grass or something like that. And then it becomes grazing land or something like that. So I think it's important to be able to work out how to make the process collaborative and allow for as many stakeholders possible to understand why the approach needs to be in a certain way, so that the trade-off doesn't end up being, well, in order to mitigate, we're actually going to just ruin the ecosystem entirely, as opposed to allowing for light burns at the right time of the year and reducing the fuel load so that that light burn doesn't necessarily end up causing some sort of disaster. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, that's a very good point. It just, and I really like what you just said. Like mitigating doesn't, like the fire mitigation is not an excuse for destroying natural ecosystems. I totally agree with that. And that's, it's a matter of trade-off. And that's why now we are trying to push towards integrated fire management, trying to put everybody around the table, all the stakeholders. So we have, I have a question here for Akli. In your presentation, at some point, you said that over the next 40 years, it is possible to reduce wildfire occurrence by 30%. How did you get to this number?
This was based on some scientific tools. One of the tools was a landscape fire model, and basically, well, fire, let's say fire in a simple way, fire depends on three things: ignitions, climate or meteorology, and fuels in the landscape. So what we did was, through these proposals, we basically said, if we increase management, we're going to change the distribution of fuels, and we're going to have a higher proportion of fuels that are less flammable, have lower densities or lower biomasses. And when we use these fire landscape models and generate thousands of hypothetical wildfires in the landscape, we see a reduction in the burnt areas when we compare with business as usual, nothing is done and everything maintains the same, versus we change the landscape and reduce the fuels in several degrees. So I think I replied the question, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. We're not gonna go any further into like wildfire probability.
Yeah, sure.
It's way beyond this. It's way beyond this. But actually, you got a few other questions, but actually, I think they are applicable to our other speakers as well. Can you clarify actually what you mean by fuel reduction around villages? And I think like when it comes to fuel reduction, it also applies to what Misha and Vanderia are trying to do as well. Do you mean domestic fuel usage or geological features such as peatland? Or do you see any potential negative impacts to the villagers regarding this strategy?
Okay, it's an interesting question. First, we live in a country where there's no, in our times, things have changed, and in our modern times, things have changed, and there's no domestic fuel usage anymore. We cook with gas or we cook with electricity. We have our, I mean, we use wood for fireplaces, but that's basically it. We don't use shrubs for to make the cattle beds. So that kind of traditional use of fuels is getting lost more and more. But what is important to understand and to explain is that we have a law that started after the 2017 wildfires. After dramatic wildfire seasons, there's always a bunch of laws coming, new laws regarding wildfires, and 2017 was very fruitful in this sense. A lot of laws. One of them is you need to clean your house, around your house, in a radius of 50 meters or 100 meters to protect villages, to protect assets, to protect people. So this is mandatory by law.
Yeah.
So basically what we did in the project, we said, okay, we're going, regardless of if we believe or not in this, we are going to follow the law and say around the villages, this needs to be clean, but there's no real usage for that biomass.
Okay.
Although we're now trying to use that biomass to make electric production for small how do you say this, for small energy
Oh yeah, I see. Yeah.
small scale energy creation.
Bioenergy type of use. Okay, yeah, I totally see what you mean. Yeah, exactly. So that's interesting because I mean in France we have the same. In France it's the same. Like by law we are supposed in what we call red areas we are supposed to clean around our houses. In the US and in Canada it's more of it's a voluntary basis, what we call the fire smart type of approach. Misha, is your do you think the type of actions, or actually do you target your actions towards like those areas, like interfaces where people might be at risk, and so you're trying to like help those areas to be more fireproof, or is that like not something you're taking into account at all?
Are you catching me?
Yeah.
So it's been interesting actually in the areas where we've been doing restoration work specific to fire. We've had a challenging time trying to work out who is keen to work with us, largely because a lot of the landscape that's been burned is either owned by large landowners or it's tied up within wildlife services of sorts. So for us to kind of pinpoint into a place where there is a community that's going to benefit from the trees, from the protection that indigenous forests will bring, as well as restoring the hydrological cycle within the area, etc. It's a bit of a process for us. I say it's a bit of a hit and miss, actually. We'd love to be able to have more options when we're doing what we're doing. But I suppose it's a case of a lot of the land is owned by big landowners, and so they're not necessarily interested in the restoration approach that we're taking. A lot of the time it's just kind of removing of the alien vegetation, big machinery type approach.
Okay, thanks. And Vendry, I guess I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce that properly. The Brigada Alter or something like that. You guys are trying to help. Are you trying to help maybe farmers or some communities that want to manage their fuel and trying to help protect their communities by using your traditional knowledge and clearing the vegetation?
Yes. The Brigada has some goals, to inform for information and prevent the people how to manage the fire. But in our community, that our house is building for material from the forest, like wood, straw. We clean, close our house, our community, because we know every year in the summer we have many fire in the forest, and it's the way how we protect our place from the fire that's coming, because in the forest we have many problems with lodgers, with gold mining close our territory. Yeah, and they manage the fires that it's burn our area that we live. So we know, yeah, that we have to protect our community, cleaning around, yeah, like roads, all of our community to protect, because it's very dry, the forest.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it is this time for us, the Amazon gets on fire.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And we are reaching the end of this summit. I'm going to close this conversation with a final question to all of you guys. I guess we want to finish on a positive note, I would say, or like an encouraging note. What would you guys like to say to communities around the world affected by forest fires but feeling disempowered to do something about it? I mean, like cheer up, Charlie, but you know, just like something to constructive than that.
Like happy clappy.
So, like, actually, go ahead.
It's a difficult question. I think it's the most difficult question of all. I think when we want to protect something, when we value something, we need to take active measures to protect it. We do that with our houses, with our cars, with. So I think with the forest, in the rural landscapes, we should do the same thing. If you value them, we should protect them. So to those people that are feeling disempowered, I would say be active. Although it's easy to get depressed after large wildfires, seek help. I think one thing that helps a lot people is just to sit around the table, have a cup of coffee, discuss a little bit of cake, of course, and discuss. It's a game changer, believe me.
Oh yeah, I believe you.
It's some free coffee, some free cake, and just talk about the problems, talk about potential solutions, and don't close yourself in the depression, and so try to reach out and discuss. And I think that's the way forward. And I think also science is the way forward. Science can help us guide us a little bit through the right direction, and not make mistakes based on the absence of evidence or of knowledge.
Or the gut feeling sometimes. Yeah, feeling.
Yeah.
Thank you, Akli. Misha, and we finish with Andrea. Misha, go ahead.
Thank you. So the first thing I would say is it's a good idea to start planning before the fire happens. So connect with everyone that's in a basin, within a fire corridor. Connect with the local schools, community centers, NGOs, municipalities, and try and plan to have a mitigation process that allows you to limit the damage that's going to happen. What's going to happen on a very simple basis, household by household. What's going to happen when the big fire comes, and who's going to be doing what within a situation like that. Mm-hmm. And then what happens after the fact, so that you've got a step-by-step guide, and it allows for you to be able to make big decisions without you having to make things done as a knee-jerk reaction. I think that there's so much risk that you can mitigate by having pre-thought about everything, mapped it out, and then being able to refer to a guide that allows for you to take the necessary steps. Mm-hmm. When the fire does come, I totally agree with actually, I think bringing people together, creating a sense of hope, creating a sense of celebration, rebirth, allow for the phoenix to rise from the flames, and give people the opportunity to see the opportunity in the fire. Fire is a natural process within most landscapes, not all, but most. And so seeing this as an opportunity and seeing how you can push people out of a place of being depressed and allow for the restoration process really to bring some positive nature to it.
Well, thanks a lot, Misha. That's great. And Vendriya, that's for you to conclude on that. What do you want to say?
So in my place, yeah, to fight the fire, and that we know all the summer season, the Amazon are on fire. We formed volunteer forest firefighter. Yeah, and these volunteer are people from our community. Yeah, and how we can educate it, how we can do the prevention, and how we can protect the forest. And also we know that the fire is not bad, yeah, but you must to know how to manage, how to use it, the fire for our lives, yeah, for to have a comfortable life, and it doesn't use it, yeah, to destroy our place, our mother earth, yeah. And I think to protect our place, it's good idea to be volunteer, yeah, and give information for the people, how we can preserve our territory, our city, the forest, yeah, and the place that we live. And in this one, we can also ask for the government. They have most to do for us, yeah, to support the community, to support the people, how we can protect it, how we can prevent the fire in the forest.
All right. Well, thank you very much, all of you guys. I think like it's a nice conclusion to my opening when I said, post-fire restoration. It's not only like replanting trees or rebuilding houses, and like because what you guys say, it's like post-fire restoration. It's before anything else. That's a social process. That's just bringing everybody together, and that's easier said than done. But that's very encouraging that some people like you guys are trying to do that. So we're reaching the end of this webinar. Thank you very much to our speakers. I think that was a very, very good introduction to the topic. I would have myself, like, I have so many other questions I would love to ask, but it would take the whole day. So thank you very much for your involvement, for your participation in this summit. I also want to thank the participants and their questions. I'm sorry we're not able to address them all, but feel free to reach out to one of us if you really want to have an answer. I also want to thank Willie and Anna, who are my backup, my safety net in the backstage. You guys didn't see them, but they really helped us to make that happen. And thank you again for your interest, and I really encourage you guys to visit the different links that have been posted on the chat. Thank you very much, everybody, and hopefully, see you soon on another summit. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.